Hey guys, it has been a whole year since I first started this channel. First, I want to say a very cheesy thank you to everyone who has liked and commented and subscribed and followed the channel. I honestly could not have done it or had the success that I've had without the support of you guys. So thank you so much. I decided to do a little Q&A to celebrate. So I combed through a lot of the comments and the emails that I get. A lot of frequent questions that I get, and I've decided I'll answer them here. I've answered a lot of them in the comments section, but some of them are very common, so I figured I would answer them in a video to hopefully help some people out too at the same time. So the first question is, what size knitting needles do you use and what kind of yarn? Most of the projects I film, I use a size 8 pair of knitting needles. I also use a smaller double-pointed needle that I think is a size 5 for videos that are more zoomed in. For like the technique videos that I make, I use a really big pair of knitting needles that I have. It's a size 15. Those are the biggest size that I have, and I don't think I've ever used them for like an actual project unless I had super bulky yarn. But I use it just because they're really big and you can see them really nicely. For the yarn in my videos, I go to the cheapest big box store, and I go to the crafts aisles, and I go down to the very bottom shelf where they have the most cheapest yarn, and it's completely synthetic. If you lit a match to it, it would probably burst into dust. And I use that just because a lot of the videos that I make are kind of throwaway swatches that I'm doing just to show you a technique. If I'm knitting something like a hat or a scarf, something that I'm actually going to want to wear, then I'll kind of splurge and buy a nice wool or kind of a blended synthetic blend, cotton blend. But for the most part, most of the yarn you see in my videos is the cheapest, most uncomfortable, scratchy, not found in nature material that you can find. My biggest problem with knitting is I can never get my edges to look nice. Do you have a particular technique? I don't. I think the most important thing for edges is to keep a really even tension in your yarn. I think a lot of people will tell you that. Whenever I'm knitting a project, I always try to keep an even tension. So if I'm gonna hold something really tight, then I want to keep that tightness for the entire time. Or if I want something to be very loose, I'll try to keep that too. So edges are probably the hardest part because that's where you kind of lose a lot of that tension because you're putting down your needle and you're switching sides. So for me personally, I always make it a point to keep my edges very tight. And that makes kind of a nice straight line. But as for actual like techniques for knitting the edges of a knitting project, I don't know any. If you know of something that would be beneficial to making a nice straight edge for a project, let me know in the comments. Are you American or Canadian? Just wondering because you cast off, which is Canadian knitting language, not bind off, which is American knitting language. I am American, but possibly I picked up the vocabulary from a Canadian. I don't know. A lot of my videos, I probably don't use the most official terms for a lot of knitting techniques. And that actually brings me to the next most frequent comment that I get on all of my videos is my speed knitting video. My speed knitting video has been one of my most successful videos, but it's also one of the most controversial. Every week I get a couple of comments from people who are usually helpful, pointing out that I'm actually continental knitting and Norwegian purling, which is helpful, but I already know that and I put that in the description box right below the title of the video. This is okay, but then I get some commenters who are kind of negative in their tone and say things like, Can you please call this speed knitting for beginners or have continental knitting in brackets? I've been knitting for years and was expecting something different. You call that speed knitting? LOL. This is not speed knitting, just regular continental and demonstrates excessive hand movements. Blah, blah, blah. You call this fast? I think the speed pearl you wear is twice. I know! My answer to everyone is that I know. I know my speed knitting is actually a form of continental, and I know that my speed purling is actually a form of Norwegian purling. But if you're a beginning knitter who wants to speed up your knitting, you're probably not going to be searching in YouTube for those types of terms because you're not going to know them. Like I said, I don't use a lot of official knitting terminology in my videos, and that's mainly because I don't know a lot of it. Sometimes I'll call stitches loops, sometimes I'll call skeins, I'll call them just the bunch of yarn or the rest of the yarn, and that's mainly because I don't know how to pronounce skeins or skeins. I don't know if it's skeins or skeins or skeins or skeins, so I don't say it, and that's okay. For me personally, continental knitting and Norwegian purling are the fastest methods that I've learned to speed up my own knitting, and so that's why I titled this video Speed Knitting. But if you're still outraged that I call it speed knitting, please do yourself and myself a favor and click in the description box right below the video where I say this is actually continental knitting and Norwegian purling. I do like the commenters who are a little more constructive in their criticism, who leave recommendations for faster methods like Portuguese knitting or Russian purling. I always like to learn new methods and new techniques for knitting, and so those ones are very appreciated. But rest assured, if I do find a faster way of knitting, you'll probably see a video called How to Speed Knit Even Faster. Is it possible to knit a braided cable without a cable? I'm assuming you mean a cable without a cable needle, and in that case, it is possible. I use a little twisted cable knitting needle in most of my videos that have cabling in it, but you don't have to have one of those. You can use a pencil or a pen or anything that's a long stick that you can use to put stitches onto.
Where did you get your cable needle?
Michael's.
Where did you get your blue knitting needles from?
Michael's.
Are you married?
Who wants to know?
Can you make a sock knitting tutorial?
I could, and I will go do that right now.